Well, people, it's official. I'm no longer an illegal alien. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Gartesian. I kind of talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of moving to Armenia. If you've been watching my last couple of videos, welcome back. Thanks for sticking with me on this crazy journey. This episode is going to be a doozy. I've filmed this in many iterations thinking it was finally the end, but it wasn't. And basically this whole episode, all I'm talking about is my residency experience, applying for residency. Very similar to citizenship. So if you're thinking about applying for citizenship, listen to this or send this video to somebody that's thinking about getting citizenship or residency in Armenia, because boy, let me tell you, it is a fucking show. This video is going to be probably very long, and it's going to be a lot of cursing, and I might even piss a couple people off, or a lot of people, so be warned. If I have time, I'll leave chapters down in the description so you can kind of, oh, I'm missing a button. Oh, scandalous. If you're looking to jump around, you can use the chapters to jump around. But basically, I'm going to try to tell my story again in chronological order from start to beginning. Oh my God, where do I begin? So I land in Armenia in June. And before coming to Armenia, I asked a few different people, basically like Repat Armenia, Birthright Armenia, friends that have moved there, and everyone made it sound like the residency process is super easy. Oh, all you have to do is bring like a copy of your birth certificate, baptism paper, you fill out one form, and bada bing, bada boom, you're done. Do not believe anybody that says it's easy probably has never gone through it themselves or applied before the Artsakh War, at least the recent one. I gotta tell you, before we get into the details, this has probably been the hardest, the most stressful, emotionally, physically intense process I've ever been through in my life. Anyone that I talk to now that has ever gone through a citizenship or residency process, I think I will immediately have a connection to them, because I realize how horrible it is. It's so confusing, so frustrating. Not only is it a hard process to go through if you speak the native language, but if you're trying to go through it on your own and you don't speak the language fluently, even if you, like, I think my Armenian is like okay, it's not like the best, but I think I can get by. But this process on top of that made me feel like completely inferior. So let's start from the very beginning. I land in June. I bring all the documents that I thought I needed with me. I got a list from Repat Armenia, and I was like, great, I have all these things. Perfect. When I first got to Armenia, I was working for a company. They were very generous, and let's say they were relaxed in letting me work there while I was figuring this stuff out. The company let me bring a representative to OVIR. OVIR is spelled O-V-I-R. Basically what OVIR is the old acronym for the Soviet Armenian, I guess, government agency that handles all the passport stuff. Technically, it's no longer called OVIR, but everyone calls it OVIR. So they came with me to OVIR, and they were like, okay, what does he need to provide for citizenship? And they said, well, first of all, how old are you? And I was like, I'm 28 at that time. They're like, oh, it's probably better if you just apply for residency instead of citizenship. And I was like, okay, like I know about the whole army rule. Like if you're 27, you have to serve in the army if you're a citizen. But I'm over that age. They're like, yeah, but it's probably better because if they change the rules or if there's a draft, you could be drafted. So it's better if you do residency first. And also it's easier to apply for citizenship if you already have residency existing. And I'm like, okay, like sure. So they explained there's like a 1-year, 5-year, and 3-year residency you can apply for. No, 1, 5, and 10. I think it's like 1, 5, and 10. The 1-year and 5-year were like almost the same, if not more, than how much the 10-year one was. And the documentation was actually less for 10 years. So I was like, all right, then I guess I'll just do 10 years. I said, okay, I'll just do the 10 years. So they said, here's your application. Bring back a notarized and translated copy of your birth certificate, your passport, your parents' documentation, your baptism information, and like one other thing. I was like, all right, that's, oh, and your pictures. I'm like, all right, that sounds pretty simple. They make it sound so easy. Bullshit. So the first thing that I do, so that was my first trip to OVIR. The second trip that I did after I left there is I went to get my photos done. Probably the easiest thing that I did in this entire journey was getting the photos done. Went straight to a shop that I know that does photos. Asked the guy to take some pictures for me for a passport. I only needed 6, but or was it 4? I think it was like some weird, like they said you needed 4, but he only could do 6. like the sheet came in 6, or they needed 6 and he could only do 8. I think 4 was required, but he said he only could do it in a sheet of 6. So I said, whatever, just do all 6. That costs like 2,000 dirham. I had to do is get my documents translated and notarized. So at my office, I asked for a suggestion of where can I go to get documents notarized and translated. So she gave me a list of offices near me that I could do that at. So of course, being Armenia, everything is so freaking hard to navigate around. None of the addresses make sense. So I was circling the block for like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes trying to find the door to this business. So finally I found an entrance to like a corporate office door, but then their office, you have to go like upstairs, but there's no sign that says what businesses are inside. Finally I say, is the translation or notarization place upstairs? And they're like, yeah. So I go upstairs. So awkward. I walk into this place and they're all like having lunch, and there I am just standing there with like my thing of papers. I feel like a freaking idiot. And I'm like, hi, can I like come in? So they stop eating and they're like, yeah, what can we do for you? I'm like, can you guys notarize and translate these? They're like, no, we can only notarize them. We can't translate. I'm like, so they're like, you can get it notarized here, but go somewhere else to translate it. I'm like, you guys can't do both. They're like, no. I said, can you suggest somewhere where I can do both at the same time instead of going to 2 different places? They're like, yeah. They gave me a name and an address of somewhere. Oh, by the way, the first office was somewhere like near Republic Square, the one that was like no help. And they gave me an address for somewhere closer to like Opera. So I said, thank you. So I get the address, I get the name, I take all my documents, and I start trying to search for this other notarization translation place. It's really funny because there's like 4 in a row, and it's kind of weird because like they all do the same exact thing. I guess it's not weird. It might be kind of normal. But there was like 3 in a row or 4 in a row, all notary and translation places, but I couldn't find the one of the name that they told me about. So I go to the first one and I'm like, hey, do you know where this store is called, or this office is called? It was suggested to me. They're like, no, sorry, but we do what you're looking for. So if you can't find it, you can just come back here. So I was like, all right, cool. So I go around the block like twice. Of course, it's Armenia, so I can't find it. So I go back to the first place. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I can't find it. But basically, I'm just looking to get these translated notarized. All right, cool. So she's like flipping through the papers. Okay, cool. This is simple. She's like, hold on. And I'm like, oh, what? And she's like, I can only translate your birth certificate. I can't notarize it. I'm like, why? This is the original paper. And she's like, because it's not apostolized. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? She's like, you have to have it apostolized. I'm like, okay, but what is that? Basically, she was having a hard time explaining to me in English what it is. So she just, this is completely illegal, or at least in America it is. She showed me somebody else's passport and she flipped it over and showed the stamp of the embassy on it, or the state. I think the person, it was like an Armenian person from California, and I think they had like a California stamp on it. And she's like, you need this. And I'm like, I don't have that. And I'm like, can I get that here? She's like, no, you have to fly back to America. And I'm like, I'm not flying back to America. So she's like, I can notarize. She's like, I can translate it. I'm like, just translate it, and I'm just going to keep continuing to see what happens. And that's my birth certificate, my one that was given at the hospital. I get all my documents. That cost about maybe 35,000 dirham. I'll try to like do the currency exchange on the screen. Photos cost about 2,000. The translation and notarization cost about 35,000 dirham. So I leave it, and she's like, you have to come back in a couple of days. I'm like, you want me to leave all of my original documents here? Like, I've never given somebody my passport before and me not be there. But she's like, yeah, you have to leave it here. So I'm like, I guess I have no choice. So I leave my papers there. She texts me on Viber. I gave her my Viber number. So she texts me like 3 or 4 days later. So I go back to the notary and translation place. I get all my documents, including a translation of my baptism paper. I go back and I fill out the application and I make copies of everything. That was trip number 5. Now we're on to trip number 6. 6 is going back to Ovia for like the second time. So I bring back my documents and I'm like, here you go. Here's everything. And they're like, yeah, they're not, the people at Ovia, they're like, this isn't going to work. And I'm like, why? They're like, well, it's because on your baptism paper, it says you were baptized, but you're not Armenian. I'm like, yeah, but if you look at my name, I was baptized in an Armenian church. If you look at my parents' passports, they both have Armenian names. They were like, nope, we need something. You either need to be baptized. This was like kind of hush-hush. I don't think she's like supposed to tell you this, but she was like, you have to either be baptized in Armenia, or you have to have a paper from America saying that was apostolized, saying that you were baptized in Armenian church. and that you're ethnically Armenian. So I said, what do you mean? Like, I have to get re-baptized? And she's like, yeah. She's like, it's better if you do it at Echmiadzin. I'm like, but I was already baptized. She's like, yeah, but this is to prove that you're Armenian. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird. So they didn't let me apply. They basically gave me back all my papers. I talked to my work and I was like, no. First, I contacted Birthright, and I was like, I was like, does anybody know about like getting baptized in Armenia? Can anybody help me? And I'm not going to name names, but basically one of the assistants at that time was like, nope, you just got to go there and make an appointment. I'm like, you want me to drive 45 minutes just to make the appointment and then come back and then go back to do it? They're like, yep, sorry. Oh, no, wait. They came with me. Okay. Oh my God. I almost forgot about this. So a representative from Birthright came with me to St. Gregory's in the middle of Yerevan, right next to Republic Square. Well, not right next to, like 15 minutes away. So they're like, she was helping me translate. Like, he's here to inquire about a baptism. Do you do them? He's like, this is like, I don't know if he was a priest or if he's just an assistant. I don't know. And he's like, who wants to get baptized? And then she's like, him, the guy I'm with. And he's like, where is he from? And she's like, he's American. He's like, oh, he doesn't look American. He looks Barska High. And I'm like, I'm just standing there pretending I don't understand Armenian. I'm like, what difference does it make? Like, like the comments he was asking and the questions he was asking had nothing to do with what we were trying to accomplish. After she was like brushing that off, he was like, oh, sorry, we don't do that. He has to go to Echmiadzin. I'm like, all right, whatever. So I asked him, like, can you help me make an appointment? They're like, nope. So I asked Birthright, I was like, can you help me make an appointment? They're like, nope, you have to go there. And I'm like, all right, this is weird. So I talked to my coworkers and they were able to call Echmiadzin and like got transferred like 3 different people. And finally somebody was able to make an appointment over the phone for a baptism appointment. They were like, the only availability we have is like 10 o'clock Sunday morning or like 10 o'clock Saturday morning, which was like in a couple of days from then. They were like, bring 2 candles, a crucifix, a towel, and a Godfather. And be at the church at 10 o'clock. And we were like, she was like, that's your only option because it was summertime. And then also because after the war, a lot of people wanted to get baptized at Echmiadzin. So they were like, we're really booked, especially for summer and because of the war. So I was like, all right, I'm going. So after asking like 15 of my friends, oh, and I don't know who said this, but like somewhere along the way, they said, not only should your godfather, your new godfather, because I already have one, be ethnically Armenian, but they should also be a citizen born in Armenia from an Armenian church. So I had friends that were born in Armenia, but like 1 or 2 of them wasn't baptized. And then I have friends that were baptized, that were baptized in Armenia and are citizens, but they weren't born in Armenia. So finally I found somebody that met all the criteria, like this weird criteria that like is not a law, but like they said it's better. I don't know, it was weird. I'm not going to say who it is just to keep it confidential, but finally he comes with me. We go to the church. They said come a few minutes before. And I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe they're organized. We get there like at 9:50 a.m. Doors were locked. Like just the front desk, like candle selling lady. I don't know what like that title is, but the lady that sits the old lady that sits in the front that sells the candles. We were like, hey, we have an appointment at 10 o'clock. They told us to come early. It's 9:50. They're like, oh, just wait outside. The priest is not ready yet. I'm like, okay. So we're outside for like 20 minutes. So this is like now like 10-15 minutes past our appointment time. We go back in and she's like, yeah, wait here. He'll be out in a few minutes. So the priest comes like 5-10 minutes later. So now we're like 20 minutes past our appointment time. So we start doing the whole Jesus Mesus thing. We do the thing, like, you know, with an adult. I was like an adult baby. We do the thing and we were like, great. Can we have the paper? Because the whole point of doing this whole thing was to get the paper saying I was baptized in Armenia and I'm Armenian and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh no, it's the weekend. I don't write the paper. Come back on Monday. We'll have it Monday. The person that does the paperwork. I'm like, and I said to him, can you please help me translate and let him know this is urgent and anything that he can do just to write it today. And he asked again and again, he said no, and he can't do it now. And the person that usually does it doesn't come in until Monday, but if you come Monday, it'll be done. I was like, whatever. So now I go back to my apartment. I wasn't able to go that Monday, so I went back like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And I'm like, hi, I'm here to pick up this is like, I don't know, the second time I went to Echmiadzin. Oh my God. Wait, I forgot about the first time I went to Echmiadzin. The first time I went to Echmiadzin, oh my God. See, this story is so long that I keep forgetting about these details. The first time I went there, I brought the paper that came with me from my church. And they said, we can stamp this to say that we will write a letter saying that you were baptized in Armenian church, but we can't write that you're Armenian. But I said, Ovir requires for the document to say that I'm Armenian. Like, clearly I'm Armenian. Can you please just write it? They're like, no, sorry, we don't do that. But we can just write that you were baptized and stamp it with your Echmiadzin stamp. And I'm like, okay. So then when I brought them that one, they said it's no good. That's when they said you have to get baptized. So then this is the third time I'm going back to Echmiadzin to pick up my baptism paper, because the first letter that I brought from America was pointless because they couldn't write that I was Armenian. The second time I went to Echmiadzin was to get baptized. The third time I went to Echmiadzin was to pick up my paper. So I go into the same office. I'm like, hey, a couple days ago I got baptized. Can I please pick up my paper? They said, what day did you come in? I'm like, Saturday. And he looks at the paper. He's like, what's your name? And I said my name. And he's like, okay, but when did you get baptized? I said, on Saturday. I don't know if like I was messing up my Armenian, but I must have said to him I was baptized on Saturday, no lie, like 4 times. And the log is one paper. I can see all the names. And I'm like, are you a idiot? Can you not read? Like, can you just go down the list and read it? And he's like getting mad at me. And then finally he finds my name. And I'm like, yes, that's me. It's one paper long with a couple of names. Just read the ledger. Finally, he's like, oh. He takes out a piece of paper all slow. Like, oh my God. Like, I think he was a priest, or maybe like a priest in training. I don't know what they're called. Don't ask me. I'm not a holy roller. So he gets out the paper and begins to start writing the card. Oh, first he's like, you have to buy the card. I'm like, what? He's like, you have to go to the gift shop, buy the card, come back. And I'm like, you can't just write on a piece of paper. So I'm like, whatever. So I go to the gift shop, buy a baptism. It's almost like a holiday card, but there's Jesus on it. So I paid for the card, bring it back. He writes my thing, and I'm like, okay, I was like, they told me that it would be ready. They're like, oh, I don't know who you talk to. I don't know what they're talking about. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So I'm just sitting there all awkward, like in this like priest's office, and people are like coming in and out. Finally, he gives it to me. I'm like, thank you. And I head out. So now I go back to Ovir and I bring him the certificate, and I said, here, I was baptized in Echmiadzin to show that I'm Armenian. Can we continue? They're like, okay, this is great, but we can't use it. I'm like, why? They're like, because your middle name is missing. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I said, it's not a big deal. Like I said, like sometimes I use my middle name on documentation. Sometimes it's not needed. They're like, okay, we know in America it's not always required, but in Armenia we take middle names very seriously. So I'm like, so what are you saying? Like, can I just write it in? Like, it's not like a legalized document. It's just like literally a piece of paper that says name, birth date, phone number, I don't know, and then the date of the baptism. They're like, no, you can't write it. So they were like, you have to go back to Echmiadzin for them to write your middle name. One word. Go back an hour away to write one word on a piece of paper. I'm like, are you flipping kidding me? There's no way. I'm not going there a 4th time. So they're like, you can try the large church on, is it Abovian? I forget. There's like another really big church in Yerevan, like near the Moscow theater. You know what I'm talking about? If you know which is that Mashtots? I don't know. If you know which one I'm talking about, the one near Moscow theater, that really big old one, write it in the comments. I forget the name right now. Abovian? I don't know. So I go to the church. I'm like, hey, listen, I just came back from Ovir. They won't let me apply for a residency. Is there somebody that I can talk to? This is like, again, to the candle lady. I basically met every candle lady in Armenia by this point. So I'm to the candle lady. I'm like, listen, is there anybody that I can talk to that can help me with this paper? She's like, yeah, you can go talk to the priest in the adjacent building. So I go out of the church. I go into this like little, I guess it's like an administrative building. So it was so awkward, like so awkward. The guy opens the door. He was just wearing plain clothes. And I was like, hi. And he's like, how can I help you? I'm like, I'm looking for someone to help me with this paper because they didn't write my name, my middle name on the paper. And so he's like, so he goes into a different room, says something, I couldn't hear him. And then he's like, okay, you can go in. So I go in, and now this is like the priest's office. So I go into the priest's office. Meanwhile, the guy he didn't even look at me. He was doing some fee thing around his desk. And I was like, hi, like this is my name. This is like, I'm trying to apply for a residency, but they forgot to write my middle name. Can you please write my middle name on my paper? So he's like, who wrote it? He's like, who wrote your original one? I'm like, Echmiadzin. And he's like, nope. I'm not doing it. I'm not writing your name on there. I can't. I'm like, please, like, I was like, I have to go all the way back there. He's like, yep, if Echmiadzin wrote it the first time, they have to go back second time. Now, to save a super long story short, let's just say I got my middle name written. Thank you, Jesus. So finally, I got my middle name written after a long story short. I go back to Ovir. This is like the fourth time. This is the fourth time I go back to Ovir. Finally, they let me apply. They're like, okay, we see that you're baptized in our Armenian church in Armenia. They wrote your middle name. Great. So I applied. I paid 150,000 dirham to apply. And that was like kind of weird too. They like, you put like your cash into this, like they call it a kiosk, but basically what it is, no, they call it terminal. But when she kept saying go outside and pay in the terminal, I was so confused. I was like, what does that mean? I thought she meant like go to a room. So then finally, like she was like, no, there's a big orange thing. You put the money into the orange thing. So basically when they say the terminal, it's basically that thing you put money onto your card, your phone number, like to pay for your phone bill, but in America, I guess we would call it like a computer terminal. So you put your money in, you put the lady helps you, and you put in your information, and then you put the cash into the machine. And she's like, the representative, the government worker was like, okay, we're going to take your application, we're going to review it, you're going to receive 3 text messages over the course of the next couple of months, typically 2 to 3 months. The first text message is like a processing, letting you know that it's starting to process. The second one means it has cleared the middle step, and then the last one basically means to pick it up. I said, great. I applied. I was super happy. Fast forward like a month and a half. So by this time, we're like in September. So I applied in like August. By this time, we're like in the middle or something of September. I'm like, all right, it's been like a month and a half. This is kind of weird. Like I haven't heard anything. Literally the next day after I thought that to myself, I get a phone call with an unregistered number that I don't have. I was like, that's weird. So then I get another call like 5 minutes later from the same number. So I pick it up. They're like, hi, is this so-and-so? I'm like, yeah. And I was like, what's up? And they're like, can you please come to the office, the Ovir office? And I'm like, why? Is like everything okay? They're like, can you please just come to the office? I was like, is there something that I should bring? Can you tell me what's going on? They're like, no. So I go back to Ovir. This is like the 5th time I've gone back. They're like, Gartes, thank you for applying, but unfortunately your application has been canceled or your application has been paused. And I'm like, excuse me, like what? They're like, we haven't rejected it, but we cannot go forward because the papers that you've submitted are not sufficient to apply for residency. And I said, what do you mean? Like, these are the papers that you asked me to do. Like every single thing that you told me to do is what I did. I didn't. They're like, well, this doesn't prove that you're Armenian. I said, well, that's why I went to get baptized at Echmiadzin, because you told me that by doing that, it proves my Armenian ethnicity. They're like, yes, but the paper that you have doesn't say your nationality. Somewhere it has to say nationality is Armenian. Azganun Haye. They need that exact sentence. So I said, so then why did you send me there? Why did you tell me to go there and waste all of my time? And she's like, listen, all you have to do is get a letter stamped by the Armenian embassy in America and have it apostolized to say that you're Armenian. I said, that's impossible. And she said, also, it has to be in the next 2 weeks. I said, why 2 weeks? She's like, well, it's because it's under review and we have to do this soon. If you can't do it soon, there could be problems. She's like, just try. And I'm like, there's no, I said, just to send a paper, just to send something that I have here to America is going to take a week. Then for it to go to Washington, D.C. is going to take another few days. There's no way it'll be back in this office in 2 weeks. She's like, but you have to try. I'm like, okay, whatever. So she's like, she's like, I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to write a document saying that what we reviewed to get what we talked about today, and the document's still needed. I'm like, okay, like, what am I supposed to say? So she's like, I have to write in Armenian, so I'm just going to explain to you what it says. I'm like, okay. So she's like, we talked about that the application has been on pause and that you need another document to continue the process. I said, okay. So I signed the paper, and she's like, I said, what can I do what can I accomplish in Armenia without having to go back to America to get one stamp? She's like, you can go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Diaspora Affairs office. I said, where is that? And she's like, it's in Republic Square. I said, who do I speak to? She's like, oh, I don't know. Just go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm like, okay, but what floor do I go to? Who do I speak to? Like, she's like, oh, I don't know. Just get a stamp. And I'm like, she's like, don't leave without a stamp. It's imperative. It's important. I'm like, what? So meanwhile, I'm like freaking out. I know what I'm like. So I book a taxi from Ovir all the way to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I'm like, hi. So first of all, there's no reception. It's just a security desk and that's it. Tried to speak to the security guard. That was hopeless. They were like, they didn't want anything to do with me. They didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to help me. So I see this person talking to a representative. Like clearly she works there. She's got like the black blazer on. And I'm like, can you? So once I got done talking, she's like, can I help you? Meanwhile, there's like a weird bar in between. Like she didn't say, oh, can I come in? Like what can I help you with? Like there was like a bar in between. And I'm like, listen, I just came from Ovir. Is there anything you can do to stamp my paper saying that this document is legalized? So she's like, no. And I'm like, what do I do? So she's like, hold on. So another person comes off the elevator and she speaks to her and she looks at my paper and she's like, nope, we can't stamp this. And I'm like, so who do I go to? She's like, you can go to the Ministry of Diaspora and Affairs or you have to go to America and get it stamped. And I'm like, oh my fucking God. By this time, I'm like shaking it and I'm basically almost in tears. So I walk over to the birthright office and I talk to a couple of employees and I say, listen, this is what's going on. I have no idea what to do. I have to get this paper stamped in like the next 2 weeks or else my whole thing is canceled. So they were like, so Birthright Armenia was like, you should really go talk to Repat Armenia. So I go to Repat Armenia. I'm like, hey, this is what's going on. And they were very understanding and they understood how horrible of the process this is. They're like, hold on, they called somebody in the Diaspora Affairs Ministry. There was like a commissioner of Diaspora and Affairs, blah, blah, blah. So they said, at 5 o'clock today, go to the Diaspora Affairs office and speak to this guy. I forget his name. I go and kill like a couple of hours back at my apartment. I come back to Republic Square and I go to the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and I have a meeting with this high commissioner for the Diaspora Affairs. And I was like, listen, this is what's going on. And they were like, yeah, you need to get your documents apostolized from the Armenian embassy. And even better, you need your parents' documents apostolized. I'm like, why do my parents' documents have to be apostolized? This is getting ridiculous. Like, it's like some kind of, I felt like I was like some kind of terrorist trying to like sneak my way into the country. So they were like, no, yeah, we know, but Ovir will not continue without an apostolized stamp on a letter from an Armenian church saying that you're ethnically Armenian. So I email my priest. I'm like, listen, this is what's going on. If I mail this paper back to America, it's going to take forever. I was like, can you just write a new letter for me saying that I'm ethnically Armenian? Don't say anything about the baptism. Don't say anything about my first baptism. Just can you just write a letter saying I'm ethnically Armenian? He's like, yep, no problem. He was really nice and sent the letter directly to the Washington, D.C. embassy and explained what was going on. And then I also called the Washington, D.C. embassy and was like, listen, you're going to be expecting a letter in the mail in order to be apostolized. Can you please stamp it? And also they agreed before to mail it on my behalf to Yerevan. First, when I called, they were like, we didn't get it. So then I called the U.S. D.C. embassy again, like a couple of days later, and they didn't answer. So then I called a couple of days later, and I'm like, hey, Washington, D.C. embassy, did you receive a letter? They're like, yeah, we have it. I'm like, did you send it? They're like, can you please email us a copy of your passport? Because we were supposed to look at your passport before we stamp this paper saying. I was like, okay. So I emailed them paper. So then finally a week or two goes by, maybe like 2 weeks goes by, and then they confirm that the letter has been received in Yerevan. So the letter was mailed from DC to Yerevan through diplomatic means. So I guess they have their own like mail thing going back and forth every couple of days. So they just put it in that box. They just put it in the same package and mailed it to Yerevan. I get a phone number to call, and the phone number is a girl that works in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I go back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs again, and I'm like, hi, can I get my paper that's stamped? And literally, it is the exact same letter that I already had from my priest, but it was just stamped on the back saying that the embassy in the US reviewed it, looked at it. It was literally the same exact thing. By this time, I contacted a lawyer. I was like, I was so fed up. I was so tired and completely over this whole entire process. I said, if I go back to that place, I will have a complete mental breakdown. So I spoke to a lawyer and I started working with him. So they reviewed all of my documents again, and They said basically with what I did, my parents' documents were unnecessary to have copies of and to translate. My baptism, the entire baptism fiasco was unnecessary and not needed. Basically, all I needed was that one paper to be stamped before I came to America, and I wouldn't have had any of these problems. I think he even said even the birth certificate wasn't even needed. I mean, apparently, like everyone's case is different, but since none of my papers, in America, you can't write somebody's ethnicity or their religion on your birth certificate. In some countries, they do that. Like if you're from Iran or Egypt, it'll say your ethnicity on the, not race, it'll say your ethnicity, like literally like where your parents, where they came from on the paper. But in America, you can't do that. So with my situation, so since we don't have anything like that in America, this letter written was the only thing that I could use, but it had to be apostolized in DC. So he's like, because you have this, your document, your birth certificate was unnecessary, your parents' stuff was unnecessary. So I was like, are you kidding me? The months of running around this country, the months of phone calls, of frustration, of all this mistranslation, misunderstanding, all the money that I paid, all these taxi rides, all these, I must have gone to Ovir 6 times, round trips. Each one's about 1,000 dirham. I went to Echmiadzin about 4 or 5 times. Each one's about 1,000 dirhams. And a lot of this adds up. When you have a local currency, this is not cheap. The notarization and the translation, that was all completely out of my own pocket. Like this stuff is not cheap if you have like a local income. So finally, we get the papers ready. He makes copies. He reviews it. And then a couple days later, we go back to Ovir to apply again. They said, unfortunately, because it passed the time of the agreed time frame, I cannot use my first application fee for my second one. And my lawyer was like, what are you talking about? And they were like, oh, the last time he came in here, he signed an affidavit. And my lawyer looks at me, he's like, is that true? And I'm like, I don't know. They said to sign this paper talking about what we reviewed today, and I signed it. Like, it's part of the process, right? He's like, no, what you signed was an affidavit giving up the right that if it goes beyond 2 weeks, you're forfeiting your application fee. So I was like, I have to pay the 150,000 dirham again. He's like, let me ask. So him and the director were going back and forth for it was a pretty heated argument. Not an argument, but they were pretty heated. And he was like, basically, all we can really do is request an appeal. He's like, I'll help you write the appeal, but basically think of it as if you've lost your 150,000 dirham. I'm like, okay. So we write the appeal, we hand it in, and we apply at the same time. So about 3 weeks go by or 2 weeks go by, and I get a call from my landlord saying that I have a letter. And in the letter, because it was one of those letters that you have to sign for. So my landlord was like, hey, you have a letter at High Post. So I go to High Post. It took them, I'm not even kidding, 45 minutes just to find the letter that came for me, the official government letter. So I tell them, I'm like, hi, I'm here to pick up my letter. And they were looking under all these boxes for 45 minutes. It was a complete mess. Finally, they had my letter, and in the letter, it was clearly from Ovir, but I couldn't read it because not only was it in all Armenian, but it was in legal terminology Armenian, so I really couldn't read it. So I email a picture to my lawyer, and he's like, yeah, your case has been lost. He's like, even if we take this to the Supreme Court version of Armenia, your case is really not strong. He's like, just give it up. But I'm like, all right, whatever. I get my first text message that my documents are being reviewed, which is good. And then right before I left Armenia to come back home for vacation during Christmas, I get my second text message saying that my documents are still under review, which is great. Basically, once you get that second text message, you know that you're kind of on track. So I emailed my lawyer last week, and I'm like, hey, just letting you know, the week that I left Armenia, I got my second text message, and it's been about a month after that, making this about 3 months total. Can you please check to see if my documents are ready at the office next time that you go? So then he emails back and he's like, congratulations, we received your passport. Basically, what it is, it's a book that looks like a passport, but the closest thing that I can explain to you what it is in American terms is that it's our version of a green card. I'm not a citizen, but it is a permanent residency. So now I can do things like look into getting a driver's license, opening a bank account, and the next steps after this, once I get back to Armenia, is registering for Social Security and doing a permanent address. You have to register your permanent address with the police, and if you move addresses, you have to go back to the police and then let them know. But I told my lawyer, I'm like, I am not doing these on my own. If I have to go to one more office and deal with this bullshit again, I'm gonna lose my shit. So when I go back, I'm gonna do the social security card stuff and the permanent address stuff. Oh my God, I don't ever want to talk about this ever again. This was probably like the most frustrating and pathetic experience. Like not only were they incompetent and sent me all around the whole freaking country trying to do these documents, but like the whole process has to be done in person. There is no online process. Everyone keeps talking about like some kind of like online portal. We're gonna make it so easy. Don't listen to any of that bullshit. Like, unless it's up and running, don't listen to anything anyone says about it becoming easier. Oh, we're gonna have a one-stop shop. We're gonna make it so easy for people to. Don't listen to any of that. Like, they make it sound so hopeful and like it's such a simple process, but it's not true. If you or somebody that you know is thinking about getting residency or citizenship, even if you speak really good Armenian, don't do it alone. It's worth paying the extra money to get a lawyer. I thought I could do it alone. I wanted to be self-sufficient and try and do it on my own and try and work through the system and have it being kind of like a learning process. But it was so frustrating, so god awful. I wish I just would have contacted a lawyer to begin with, because honestly, if there was one more thing that got messed up with my residency, or I had to jump one more hoop through, or one more call, or go to one more office to get something signed, I would have said, sorry, I'm done. I'm out of here. I cannot take this anymore. But finally, for right now, it's over. I have my residency card, and then we're going to go into the next steps. That's it in a nutshell. If you have questions, let me know in the comments. The one thing about residency and citizenship is that it does change. So the rules that I applied for were different than the rules that my friends applied for before the war. So if you applied for citizenship during 2020, it's different rules than what I applied for during 2021. And if you're applying for residency or citizenship next year during 2022, it could be completely different rules. Like, you have no idea what they're gonna request or what they're gonna change. And what they tell you for the rules in the office aren't always the up-to-date rules, because what they were telling me to do in 2021 were the 2020 rules. So they were making me do paperwork for rules that weren't even current anymore. Whatever. Like, share, subscribe, share. Goodbye.